are going to essentially start a project, but talk about really in this episode, we're going to focus on the question, how do I design software? What's a good approach to designing software? And like most things, I think the best way to think through this is to walk through the steps a little bit and give us some experience in designing an application. And so now this one, while we're going to go in a little bit different directions as we go through this this essentially series of videos of tutorials of instruction, we're going to build something that we're going to call the URL shortener. Now, I need to be able to type there. And we're going to do this in Python. And so I'm starting out in PyCharm, which we can start with. If you want, you can go answer the question, how do I download PyCharm? And it's free. There's a community edition, so you don't have to worry about paying anything, signing up or anything like that. And then once we get installed, we're going to come in here, we're going to do File, New Project. And here I'm just going to give it a name. So I'm going to call it URL shortener. But I'm not a big fan of having a name of a project that's just blah like that. So this is going to be the URL shortener. Let's call him, let's just call him Shorty. We're going to call this project Shorty. So we're going to give it a name, which is usually a good thing to do. Now for these, I'm just using, it's going to be Python 3.9. I'm just taking the defaults. We may come back later and change this, but right now I just want to get a project started because what I'm going to do, and it's going to create my little virtual environment, is I am going to actually sort of build our documentation as we go. So this gives me a sample Python script. So if I wanted to jump into terminal, I could come in right here. Mine is actually called Python 3. So if I do Python 3 main, bam, hi PyCharm. So this is what this is. We'll get into that a little bit later. But what I do want is I'm going to take this and I am going to start by, no, let's see. I'm trying to decide if I want to do it this way or not. Let's start by right now. Let's just do we're going to create a document. So we're going to do here, we're going to create a folder. We will call it a directory. Directory. And this is going to be called documentation. And then in here, I'm going to have a new file. And this is going to be the, we'll say the application design. And we're going to call it, we'll do this. We'll make it Markdown. We're not really going to use the Markdown stuff too much, but we're going to use that. So MD. So let's just start thinking about our design. So first, let's say the goal. First, we're going to have a goal. And so Shorty is a URL shortener. It's going to take, it takes a URL. It provides a shorter link for the user to use. Okay, easy enough. So let's say we're going to have some requirements here. So that's our goal. We're going to have our requirements. And here, let's just do it this way. We're going to do one is going to be able to, so we're going to little bit design, but a little bit talk about requirements. So we're going to be able to take in a URL, provide a shorter one. Let's see, short URL will be a, let's see, an address or server name, because this is things like bit.ly or things like that. Address or server name and a parameter. So let's say, for example, let's do an example here. Do an example. I'm going to send it https developerpreneur.com /article / my really long article title. I don't even do it like this because I think it usually does it like that. is sent in. And then let's call it HTTPS, short.srv. That's not necessarily what it's going to be called. We're just going to call it 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Gets returned. And then let's go here. Whoop. And then using the returned URL, we'll send the user to the original. So we need to store the original and the short link, maybe. And something we may want to do is, let's see, we may want to have some sort of allow for branding. We'll come back to this later. Because it may be that they just want it to be something like, it could be a server name or IP address. So it could be HTTP, it could be as simple as HTTP, because we can even do it without secure, because we really don't care. So it could be like 25.26.27.29. I don't know if that's a server, so please don't assume that. But it could even be on a port. So it could be, we won't make it a port. We'll do that, and then it would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So it could be that is our link. Maybe not, but that's, that could be it. Or it could be, brand.me, something like that. So we may allow that. Do we want to allow for multiple users? We're going to have some sort of user registration. Let's make that a question mark, because we need to think about that a little bit, because the idea here is, okay, you give me a URL and I'm going to give you back a shorter one. And then when you hit that shorter one, it's going to hit my server or some server. Preferably, I'm assuming it's going to hit my server, pass it that, and then that thing is essentially just going to do a redirect. So it's basically, the steps are, first is send a URL. New URL is returned. Call new URL, and then redirect to, we'll call it the source URL. So it's a pretty simple application when you think about it, even though it has a lot of power, because it's often that you would want to take some really long, nasty thing like this, and this could be very complex, because it could even have like a parameter. It could have a series of parameters, whatever it is. It doesn't matter what it is. We're going to want to give a short one. And just for this, it is, let's see. Let's just note, whoops, where'd that go? 6. Oh, there. Let's do it this way. Okay. And then what I want is okay, so we don't need the actual URL to be, the source URL to be unique. So we'll allow that. So if 3 people send the same URL, you could get 3 different short links. But the short links must be unique, because you have to know which URL you're going to go back to. Now, we could potentially, let's say, this would be a question is, do we want to log traffic or other info? Because we may, at some point, want to do something with that link. And that will prompt the idea of a VFV, value for value, which is a question that we will answer. Actually, all of these are going to be questions we're going to end up answering. So we get a URL. So now this is sort of that process of design. All right, what's our problem? Basically, my problem, let's say problem definition. I have a long URL and need to provide a shorter one. Basically for things like business cards and stuff like that. So that is my problem definition. So my goal is going to be, we're going to have this application shorty. It's going to be a URL shortener. We're going to take that long URL and we're going to provide a shorted link for the user to use. And basically, here's requirements. This is roughly how it works. Let's move this example up just because. Let's say input, output, and then just note. Let's see, result. So that's pretty simple. So now we need to think of a few things. So we're gonna have some questions. How do we allow a user to send us a URL and give them a short one? And then from that, and the rough thing but that is going to be, and that's going to be sort of wrapped up into that, which is going to be, let's see, part B, sort of spoiler alert on the answer is, how do I create an API using Python? And then we're going to use a thing called Flask. So this is going to be, how do I create an API using Flask? And we're going to have to do, how do I test an API call? And with this is going to be, where do I download Postman? Because we're going to use Postman for this. Within this is, how do I create, how do I, create a database and table in my SQL MariaDB with Python, because we're going to do this very specifically. We're going to script this thing out. How do I have, so we've got our testing, so we're going to be able to create this. How do I search a table for a record? And this is going to be within a relational RDBMS, relational database, management system, RDBMS. And then probably it's going to be, how do I call an API from, let's say, an application via JavaScript, and let's also say, or Python, because that's actually the whole goal of this is, I've got an application, I want to do this from Python, so I'm going to do it from there. So that gives us a pretty good list of getting started. So we're going to talk about creating an API using Python, which I think is probably going to be in here. These will be sort of combined. Then we're going to talk about testing an API call, which is going to be downloading Postman. So that's sort of our part 2. How to create a database and how do I search, those are going to be together. And then probably within here is, how do I write an API endpoint in Flask, and where would I use post, get, delete we're going to call that request types. And we'll talk a little bit about that. So that's going to be probably together as well. So that's what's coming up. This should be a pretty quick little application, but now we have several things here. We've got several things that we have walked through. We've sort of said, hey, what is all of this? Let's move branding and user registration. Let's move those back here. And now that's totally off, out of sync number wise. There we go, 5, 6, 7, 8. And so that allows, so I'm going to say, what is value for value? How do I brand my, how do I allow for user branding of data? And then user registration. So what I have to think about this is, how do I create a user, an application that requires user registration. And this will be a bigger challenge when we get to this. This one's probably pretty easy. Actually, that one's going to be difficult too. So basically, these are going to require us to build an application. So this would be, how do I build a web application with Python? Because we're going to use it all. We're going to be doing Python throughout this, although it should be pretty straightforward. You could also roughly do this in just about anything else out there. C#, Java, you name it. A lot of things have this option, different ways to skin this cat, but we are going to do it with Flask because that's a pretty cool little tool. So let's go ahead and we'll sort of wrap this one up. So now this is how you design, is you sort of walk through it and say, hey, what is my problem? What is the problem I'm solving? Okay, what is sort of the goal? What is the solution I'm thinking about? Maybe give yourself a couple examples to work with. And then start walking through it. It's like, how do I get from point A to point B? How do I get from my problem to my solution, essentially? And that's what we've done here. And now we're going to dive a little bit further as we go and actually walk into this. So if you come around the next episode, most likely you're going to want to look at is, how do we allow users to send us a URL and give them a short one, which is basically, how do I create an API using Python? How do I create an app? And actually, this one, I'm going to split this one up because we're going to do this most simply. Is we're going to actually do this code first, do something very simple, and then we are going to turn around and add to that. So actually, we're going to do this. So now, see, so that design thing is what I'm going to do is first, without doing the API, I am going to we're going to actually start building this thing out in our scripts right away. So stay tuned. Very soon we will be coming back, or just click right ahead to the next episode, and we're going to talk about how do we create something in Python that allows the user to give us a URL, and we're going to give them back a short one. Thanks for listening.